If you think taking a flight with stopovers is tiring enough, wait until you see places where simply getting there is an achievement. Forget busy airports and well-paved roads. Some corners of the world defy any notion of accessibility. Isolated islands in the middle of the ocean, mountains that seem untouchable, impassable deserts, and even villages where the only option is an exhausting journey on foot. Whether it's the extreme geography, the brutal climate, or the total lack of infrastructure, there are destinations where every visitor is a survivor. But what makes these regions so difficult to reach? Why, even though they are practically unreachable, do they still arouse curiosity and fascination? Today on Bello Mundo, we're going to explore some of the most remote and inaccessible places on the planet. Places where getting there is already a victory, and getting out, well, it's not always guaranteed. Number 1. Tristan da Cunha. To open this list in the most extreme way possible, there's nothing better than talking about a place where the idea of being far away from everything takes on a whole new meaning. We're talking about Tristan da Cunha, considered the most isolated inhabited island in the world. Now, when we say isolated, it's not a figure of speech. This volcanic island, lost in the South Atlantic, is almost 2,800 kilometers from the nearest piece of land. In other words, even if you wanted to swim away, all you'd find is ocean on all sides. And how do you get there? Well, forget planes. There's no airport, no makeshift landing strips. The only way is to board a ship in Cape Town, South Africa, and spend 7 days sailing until you finally see this small island. But it's not as if there are cruises coming and going all the time. The ships leave a few times a year, and those who arrive often have to wait months for the next departure. When visitors finally set foot on dry land, they find Edinburgh of the Seven Seas, the island's only village. With less than 300 inhabitants, the community basically depends on lobster fishing, one of the few exportable products. The structure is simple. There is a school, a general store, a community center, and that's it. If there's a medical emergency, the only doctor available does what he can. But if it's something serious, the only option is to wait for a ship and hope you make it to South Africa in time. The island has an unpredictable and mountainous climate, with dense fog covering the landscape much of the time. There is internet, but it is extremely limited, and there are no cell phone signals. This means that if someone wants to live far away from civilization, without WhatsApp, social media, or any interference from the outside world, Tristan da Cunha could be the perfect place, or a nightmare, depending on your point of view. But the most curious thing is that this small community is practically one big family. All the residents are descended from a handful of settlers who arrived there centuries ago, and the surnames are practically the same. In an increasingly connected world, Tristan da Cunha remains one of the few places where isolation is still total. Number 2. Pitcairn Islands. We leave the Atlantic behind and head straight for the heart of the Pacific, where one of the most inaccessible places, and one with a curious history, awaits us. We're talking about the Pitcairn Islands, a tiny archipelago lost in the middle of nowhere, where fewer than 50 people live, in what is perhaps the most remote society on the planet. The first challenge: getting there. There are no commercial flights to Pitcairn. The best you can do is fly to Mangareva, an island in French Polynesia, and from there board a boat that can take more than 30 hours to reach Pitcairn. But don't worry, this boat doesn't leave every day. Sometimes it's a whole month before there's another crossing. And why would anyone live there? Well, the history of the Pitcairn Islands is a real movie script. The main island was settled at the end of the 18th century by a group of sailors who led one of the most famous mutinies in history. the HMS Bounty Mutiny. These rebels, fleeing from the British Navy, burned their own ship to avoid being discovered and began to live there together with Polynesian women they had brought with them. Today, practically all the inhabitants are direct descendants of these mutineers. This makes Pitcairn a unique place, with peculiar traditions and almost total isolation. There are no supermarkets, hospitals, or even roads. Life is simple, based on fishing, growing tropical fruit, and the few supplies that occasionally arrive. For the few tourists who venture there, the reward is an unspoiled landscape, impressive cliffs, hidden caves, and a turquoise sea that seems untouched. But at the same time, the feeling of being literally in the middle of nowhere is something that few are prepared to face. Number 3. La Rinconada. Now we leave the ocean and head straight for the heights. Literally. Welcome to La Rinconada, the highest city in the world. If Tristan da Cunha is isolated by the sea and Pitcairn by travel time, La Rinconada puts the physical endurance of those who dare to reach it to the test. Located at an incredible 5,100 meters above sea level in the Peruvian Andes, this town makes anyone feel on top of the world, and not in a good way. Getting to La Rinconada is already a challenge. The road that leads there is precarious, full of dangerous curves, and requires vehicles prepared to face uneven and treacherous terrain. But the biggest obstacle isn't the journey itself, it's the air. At this altitude, oxygen is scarce, and any exertion can cause headaches, dizziness, and even fainting. Those who aren't used to extreme altitudes suffer from the famous mountain sickness, a problem that can become fatal if the body doesn't adapt. But why would anyone live in such a hostile place? Simple. Gold. La Rinconada survives because of mining. Thousands of prospectors brave the brutal conditions in search of the precious metal, dreaming of becoming rich. But the reality there is quite different from the promise of prosperity. The town's infrastructure is almost non-existent. There is no basic sanitation, running water, or sewage system. Garbage piles up in the streets, the cold is biting, and as if that weren't enough, workers are often paid in raw gold, with no guarantee that they will have any income at the end of the month. To make matters worse, uncontrolled mining contaminates the soil and rivers with mercury, making La Rinconada not only the highest city in the world, but also one of the unhealthiest. Yet every year, more people arrive, willing to try their luck. After all, even in one of the most difficult places to live, the promise of gold still shines brighter than any adversity. Number 4. Alert. If you thought the cold was already intense in La Rinconada, then get ready for a whole new level of isolation and brutal temperatures. Welcome to Alert, the northernmost inhabited place on the planet, where the landscape looks like something out of an end-of-the-world movie. Located in the Canadian Arctic, just 800 kilometers from the North Pole, Alert is a military and scientific settlement where temperatures often reach minus 40 degrees Celsius. But it's not just the cold that punishes those who dare to live there. The biting winds make the thermal sensation seem even worse, and winter brings long periods of total darkness where the sun disappears for months. And how do you get there? Well, forget any idea of roads or regular transportation. The only way to reach Alert is by sporadic military flights, which have to contend with Arctic storms and complicated logistics to land at the base. Despite being a place of constant human presence, no one actually lives there permanently. The base is staffed by military personnel, scientists, and meteorological technicians who rotate in shifts every few months. Their job? Monitoring extreme weather patterns, studying the effects of climate change in the Arctic, and collecting crucial data to predict atmospheric conditions in the northern hemisphere. Number 5. Ittoqqortoormiit. Moving on, we're now going to Greenland, precisely to Ittoqqortoormiit, one of the most remote settlements in the Arctic. With a name that defies pronunciation, this small village is home to between 450 and 500 residents who live in harmony with the icy landscape. Access to this place is extremely restricted. For most of the year, only helicopters are able to land in the region, and boats only make the crossing in the brief summer when the ice retreats enough to allow navigation. Here, daily life is based on hunting and fishing, indispensable activities for subsistence in an environment where cold and darkness dominate for long periods. The surrounding landscapes, with imposing fjords, sparkling glaciers, and skies that are sometimes filled with the legendary aurora borealis, make up a setting of breathtaking, almost mystical beauty. Number 6. Easter Island. Unlike the previous places, Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, as the locals call it, is not exactly a mystery. Its gigantic moai, the iconic stone statues, have been widely documented and arouse curiosity all over the world. But here's a detail that not many people consider. Getting there is still a real mission. This little piece of volcanic land is more than 3,700 kilometers from the Chilean coast in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and is one of the most isolated inhabited spots in the world. To visit, the only viable option is to take a flight from Santiago, Chile, and travel 5 hours over the ocean to land in Hangaroa, the island's only town. Isolation has its advantages, but it also comes at a high price. Almost everything has to be imported. Fuel, food, and building materials arrive by boat or plane, raising the cost of living. Even drinking water is a precious resource. Nevertheless, the 7,000 inhabitants of Rapa Nui have found a way to turn this isolation into something positive: tourism. Visitors arrive fascinated by the nearly 1,000 moai scattered around the island, each one carrying mysteries about its origin, transportation, and meaning. Number 7. Macquarie Island. Between Tasmania and Antarctica, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, Macquarie Island is such a remote piece of land that, to this day, it only receives scientists and research teams during certain periods of the year. Administered by Australia, it was recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1997 for its geological importance and the marine biodiversity that surrounds it. The journey there can take days, with rough waters and strong winds, usually on ships departing from Tasmania or New Zealand. The climate is harsh, with constant rain and temperatures rarely exceeding 5 degrees Celsius. Few people want to face these extremes, but those who do find surreal landscapes and huge colonies of king penguins, elephant seals, and various seabirds. There is no city infrastructure. There are only research bases to monitor climate change, ocean currents, and tectonic activity, as Macquarie lies in a zone where plates meet. Instead of streets and cars, people get around on foot, following muddy trails between hills and cliffs. It's a corner that seems to have stood still in time, demanding absolute respect for the forces of nature. Number 8. Motuo, China. Leaving the frozen oceans, our journey now takes us to the sacred mountains of Tibet, where Motuo, or Medog, has remained the last Chinese county without road access for decades. Imagine a place where, until recently, the only way to get there was via narrow trails and makeshift bridges, facing dense forests, rushing rivers, and a terrain so challenging that not even the best engineers could build a safe road. Motuo was that place. For a long time, it was considered China's last truly isolated region. The few inhabitants, somewhere between 10 and 12,000 people, live in villages hidden between mountains and deep valleys, preserving a culture strongly linked to Tibetan Buddhism. At every turn, centuries-old monasteries, sacred temples, and breathtaking landscapes reveal a land where time seems to follow its own rhythm. The first attempt to build a road took place in 1993, but landslides and constant rains quickly destroyed everything. It wasn't until 2013 that a tunnel was opened, linking Motuo to the rest of Tibet in a more reliable way. But even so, getting there remains an adventure for the most determined. The roads are still unstable, and access during certain times of the year is practically impossible. Number 9. Oymyakon. We now come to one of the most extreme places on the planet. Oymyakon, in the Republic of Sakha, Russia, holds the title of the coldest inhabited place in the world. Winter is no joke here. Temperatures can plummet to below -50 degrees Celsius, and the record has already been set at -71 degrees Celsius. And if you think it's hard to endure a few days of intense cold, imagine living like this all year round. Around 500 people call this place home, facing conditions that test the limits of the human body. Access is not simple. To get there, you have to take the Bone Road, a highway that connects Oymyakon to Yakutsk, the nearest big city. The sinister name is no coincidence. The road was built by prisoners of the Stalinist regime, and legend has it that many of them were buried under the asphalt. The soil in the region is permafrost, i.e., frozen deep all year round, making it impossible to dig or build water and sewage pipes. For this reason, the houses are adapted, and the toilets are usually in separate huts in the backyard to prevent the pipes from freezing. Daily life follows a different rhythm. Cars need to be plugged in all the time or stored in heated garages. Otherwise, they simply freeze and won't work again. Agriculture is practically non-existent, so food is based on reindeer meat, frozen fish, and the few products that arrive by truck when the roads allow. And if the winter is harsh, the summer is a shock of reality. During some months, the days last more than 20 hours, and the temperature can exceed +30 degrees, melting the surface ice and turning the ground into a quagmire. Living in this place is definitely not for everyone. Number 10. Supai, United States. To finish, we now swap the extreme cold for the hot, arid landscape of the Grand Canyon in the United States, where we find the hidden Supai. Unlike any other North American town, this one has no access roads. To get there, you have to take a 13-kilometer trail through the desert, down canyons, and across cinematic landscapes. Those who don't want to walk can use horses or even helicopters, which make occasional trips for supplies and emergencies. This extreme isolation is no coincidence. Supai is home to the Havasupai Indian Reservation, one of the oldest native groups in the region. Approximately 200 people live there, keeping their ancestral traditions alive, far from the frenetic pace of the modern world. But if access is difficult, the reward is incomparable. The place is home to turquoise waterfalls, which contrast impressively with the red rocks of the canyon. It's a true hidden paradise, almost untouched by mass tourism. And that concludes our list of hard-to-reach places. So, which of these most inaccessible places caught your eye? Tristan da Cunha with its oceanic seclusion, La Rinconada defying the altitude, or Oymyakon and its extreme, bone-chilling cold. There's no shortage of options for those who like to imagine or plan adventures in extreme settings. Leave your comment below and let's continue this conversation. And if you enjoyed this trip, you already know there's a lot more to come. So stay tuned here on Bello Mundo, because we always bring you stories that go beyond the obvious. Thank you very much for joining us. See you in the next video with more mysteries, curiosities, and legends that the world hides. See you next time.